Close your eyes and let yourself drift far away from the modern world. Imagine smoky air curling above cobbled streets, the soft clatter of wooden wheels, and the distant hum of London Bridge crowded with merchants, monks, and fishmongers. This is not the London of skyscrapers and sirens, but the London of chamber pots, church bells, and coinless hands trying to earn a crumb. Tonight, we will wander slowly through the narrow alleys of medieval London and quietly ask, how hard was it to make a living here? Before we sink into this forgotten world, take a slow breath, and if you enjoy stories that soothe the mind and stir the past, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another journey through boring, beautiful history for sleep. Asterisk, close your eyes, breathe softly, and let your mind drift to a time long before electric lights. When the world hummed at the pace of candlelight and footsteps on stone, our story today begins in a city unlike any other. A place of narrow streets, high walls, and ambitions as tall as its church spires. This is London, but not the London you know. The year is 1347. The air smells of baked bread and smoke. The River Thames ripples with small wooden boats, fishermen shouting their morning hauls as seagulls glide overhead. You are standing in Cheapside, one of the busiest markets in the city. The cobblestones beneath your feet are uneven, slick with the dampness of the morning dew, and perhaps something less pleasant around you. The chatter rises and falls like waves against the shore. Merchants bargain, mothers scold, children dart between stalls, their laughter echoing in the early light. Making a living here is not easy. For every trader who succeeds, 10 others scrape by, their hands calloused and their backs bent. Today, we will follow 3 of these lives, a baker, a fishmonger, and a wandering minstrel. Each has their own story, their own struggles, and their own dreams. Let us begin with Eleanor, the baker's wife. She wakes before dawn, her fingers already dusted with flour as she kneads dough by the dim glow of the hearth. The life of a baker in medieval London is relentless. Bread is the heartbeat of the city, a staple for rich and poor alike. But flour is expensive, and taxes are high. Eleanor knows that if the bread is too light, customers will complain. Too heavy, and they will walk away. She hums softly as she works, her voice blending with the crackling fire. Outside, the first customers are already gathering, their coins jingling softly as they wait. Next, we meet Walter, the fishmonger. His hands are rough and cold, his apron splattered with the brine of the river. Walter's day began hours ago on the muddy banks of the Thames. He hauled nets heavy with herring, his breath visible in the chilly dawn air. Now, he stands at his stall, calling out to passers-by, in a voice roughened by salt and thyme. Fresh fish, 2 for a penny. You will not find better herring in all of London. But competition is fierce. Walter's eyes dart to the stall across the way, where another fishmonger is undercutting his prices. He sighs, adjusts his display, and prays silently for the day's fortunes to turn. Finally, we turn to Giles, the wandering minstrel. He is a man of stories, of music, and of dreams too big for his coin purse. Giles travels from tavern to tavern, his lute slung across his back. His songs tell of knights and maidens, of battles won and loves lost. But in truth, Giles sings not for glory, but for survival. Each coin tossed into his hat is a meal, a roof over his head for one more night. As the day unfolds, Eleanor will sell her bread, Walter will bargain for his fish, and Giles will sing his heart out in a smoky inn. Each of them will earn just enough to carry on, but none will grow rich. For in medieval London, making a living is not about thriving, it is about enduring. Asterisk, let your breathing slow, and allow yourself to drift deeper into the cobbled streets. As morning passes into midday, and the city of London settles into its rhythm, bells toll from the Tower of St. Mary le Bow, not to announce a holiday, but to remind merchants and laborers that time, even now, is ticking, not by the minute, but by the task, by the effort of your hands, and the weight of what you carry. Eleanor, the baker's wife. wipes her brow as heat from the ovens pours into her face. The loaves are rising, cracking softly, golden, fragrant, steaming. She lays them gently on the shelves. Each one will sell for a few farthings. If she is lucky, a wealthier house may order extra. But if not, leftovers become breadcrumbs. Breadcrumbs become waste. And waste is dangerous in a house that feeds 6 mouths. In medieval London, bakers were subject to the assize of bread, a royal law that regulated bread prices and weight. If the loaves were found to be underweight, even by a little, the punishment could be public humiliation, or worse. And so, Eleanor bakes carefully. Each lump of dough is weighed with stone weights. She prays they are just heavy enough to keep the inspectors away. The price of flour changes weekly, but bread must remain stable. It is the poor man's meal, and the baker's constant gamble. Elsewhere, in the open-air market near the Thames, Walter, the fishmonger, calls louder. His throat aches now, his hands are wet and chapped, and the midday sun is drawing flies. He fans them away with a reed fan. It helps little. He knows which customers to flatter. The plump woman who buys for the priory kitchen. The timid apprentice who pays in copper. The brewer's boy with a sweet tooth for dried eel. Walter speaks to them all with charm. Though behind his eyes, he counts each coin, each fish unsold, each meal his own family may miss. The fish must be sold before evening. There is no ice, no cold cellar. Fish that does not sell rots. And rotting fish in a city already full of stench brings more than sickness. It brings suspicion. A foul-smelling stall can be shut down with just one complaint to the ward reeve. Walter works quickly, but never too quickly. His voice must remain steady. His words, pleasant. In a market of dozens of men yelling the same promise. Fresh fish, best price. Tone matters more than truth. And what of Giles, the minstrel? He stands in the doorway of a tavern, tuning his lute with fingers that remember better days. His tunic is worn, his boots unevenly stitched, but his voice is warm. Not beautiful, not perfect, but warm. And that, in a cold city, is worth something. Giles sings of the Black Prince and the war in France, of a knight who turned down gold to rescue a peasant girl, of Saint Dunstan, who plucked the devil by the nose with tongs. His audience sips their ale. Some smile, some nod, some fall asleep, but a few, a very few, drop a coin into his cup. Giles bows slightly each time, as if accepting a gift from a king. He will stay until his throat dries, or the innkeeper grows tired of him. Whichever comes first. Back in Cheapside, Eleanor walks to the well. She draws water, slowly, feeling the rope bite into her palms. Her youngest child trails behind her, chasing a wooden hoop. She speaks with a neighbor about the price of barley, about a distant cousin taken by the fever. Life here is predictable in its unpredictability. There is always something breaking, something spoiling, something owed, and yet, there is laughter. Two merchants joke about who cheated who. A girl tosses a coin in the air just to see it sparkle. Someone hums a psalm while feeding chickens in the alley. Survival is hard, but it is not always grim. As evening approaches, Walter sells his final fish. He wraps it in cabbage leaf and exchanges it for a heel of bread and a thimble of ale. He will eat slowly tonight, grateful to be full. Giles, meanwhile, finds a straw mattress in the loft of a kind innkeeper. He will not sing tomorrow. His voice is tired, but perhaps he will tell stories. Eleanor tucks her children into their shared bed, their tiny feet tangled under a woolen blanket, and as the bells of London ring again, a little off rhythm, a little worn, the city sighs and settles. Breathe in softly, and let your thoughts drift deeper into the quiet murmur of medieval London. As the city begins to fade into twilight, its warmth reveals its shadows. Life here is not all bustling markets and whispered prayers. For every loaf of bread and lute song, there are challenges waiting just beyond the light. The first shadow looms in the form of taxes. In this London, no one escapes the collector's reach. From the wealthiest guildmaster to the humblest washerwoman, Each person owes something: coins, goods, or labor. Even the smallest house is subject to a hearth tax, paid simply for the privilege of keeping warm. Eleanor knows this burden well. She keeps a careful ledger of every farthing earned, knowing the sheriff will take his due, and that failing to pay can bring shame more worse. Walter, the fishmonger, faces a different kind of toll. As a merchant, he owes a fee to the local guild, the powerful organization that controls the markets. The Fishmongers Guild regulates everything: the size of nets, the hours of trade, even the types of fish that may be sold. To defy the guild is to invite ruin. Walter nods respectfully when their officers pass, his lips forming polite words, even as his mind curses the weight of their rules. And for Giles, the minstrel, there are no guilds or taxes to worry about. But he must still contend with the unpredictable whims of fortune. A single bad performance, a sour note, a joke that falls flat, can close the doors of an inn forever. He is constantly aware that his talent is not just his livelihood, it is his survival, beyond taxes and guilds. There are dangers that no one can avoid. One of these is illness. The narrow streets of London are alive, not just with people, but with waste. Chamber pots are emptied into alleys. The Thames, though vital, is also polluted. Rats scurry along the docks. Their small, sharp claws carry more than food scraps. They carry the seeds of a terrible plague, though it has not yet struck London. Whispers of the Black Death travel with merchants and sailors. People speak of it in low voices, as if naming it might summon it. Eleanor hears these whispers as she queues for flour. Walter listens as he bargains for salted cod, and Giles catches fragments of the tales as he tunes his lute. The fear settles in their bones, even as life moves on. Then there is the matter of justice, a word that carries little comfort for those without coin. In this city, laws are strict, and punishments swift. A stolen loaf of bread can lead to the stocks, where public humiliation is only the beginning. A debt unpaid can mean prison, where cold stone walls do little to protect against a gnawing hunger. And yet, for the wealthy, justice bends. A bribe can erase a crime. A favor can change a verdict. Eleanor's husband once stood accused of selling underweight bread. Though the charge was false, they paid a hefty fine to avoid the risk of a public trial. She still feels the weight of that loss in every coin she counts. Despite these trials, there is resilience. A quiet strength that threads through the city, like gold in a tapestry. Neighbors share scraps of food when times are lean. Strangers pause to lift a fallen basket. At night, beneath the glow of rush lights, families gather to tell stories and sing songs. It is these moments, small and fleeting, that give life its meaning. As the day gives way to night, the streets grow quieter. Eleanor finishes, scrubbing the baking troughs, her arms heavy with exhaustion. She lights a small candle, offering a prayer that tomorrow's dough will rise, and that her children will stay healthy. Walter wraps his empty baskets in cloth and sits by the fire in his small home. His wife brings him a bowl of pottage, thin but warm. And Giles stares at the stars from the roof of an inn. He plucks his lute softly, not to entertain, but to remind himself that beauty still exists, even in hard times. Tomorrow will bring more challenges, taxes, guilds, illness, and the unyielding weight of survival. But for now, there is a stillness, a brief reprieve, and perhaps, in this quiet moment, they can all believe that life, though difficult, is worth enduring. Take a deep breath, and let the hush of evening settle over your thoughts. The streets of medieval London grow still. The bustle of market day replaced by the soft murmur of prayers, the flicker of lantern light, and the faint echo of bells from St. Paul's Cathedral. This is a city that works hard, but it also believes deeply in faith, in community, and in the small, tender joys that make survival worth the struggle. In Eleanor's home, the family gathers around the hearth. The firelight dances on the walls, casting long shadows that seemed to move with the rhythm of her husband's voice. He reads softly from a psalter, a small, well-worn book of prayers and hymns. His Latin is not perfect, but it does not need to be. The children listen, their eyes heavy with sleep, their hands warmed by the fire. Faith is not just a ritual here. It is a lifeline. The church offers more than sermons. It provides alms for the poor, shelter for the desperate, and a sense of purpose for those who feel adrift. Eleanor often attends Mass at St. Marylebone, where the stained glass windows glow with stories of saints and miracles. In those moments, she feels a quiet strength, a reminder that even in hardship, there is grace. Walter, the fishmonger, finds his faith not in the cathedral, but in the simple act of giving. Though his own means are modest, he keeps a small basket of scraps for those who pass by hungry. A piece of herring here, a bit of bread there. It is not much, but in a city where starvation is never far, even a small kindness can mean everything. For Giles, the minstrel, faith is found in his music. He believes in the power of stories to heal, to connect, to remind people that they are not alone. He plays his lute in a crowded tavern. The room seems to breathe together. Laughter rings out, tears are wiped away, and for a few moments, the weight of life feels lighter. Community is the thread that holds this city together. Neighbors watch out for one another. They share tools, exchange gossip, and come together in times of celebration. And mourning. In Cheapside, Eleanor often helps her neighbor, Agnes, a widow who weaves cloth for a living. Agnes's hands are stiff with age, but her skill is unmatched. She weaves patterns so intricate, they look as though they might tell stories if only you could read them. Eleanor brings her fresh bread, and in return, Agnes mends her children's clothes. It is not charity, it is friendship. In the market, Walter knows most of the other merchants by name. Though they compete fiercely during the day, they often share a drink together at night. It is an unspoken rule. The market is a battlefield, but outside of it, they are all comrades in the struggle to survive. Even in the darkest times, there are small joys, moments that shine like the stars above the city. A child's laughter as they chase a stray cat down an alley. The rich smell of honey cakes being baked for a feast day. The soft strains of a flute drifting from an open window. These moments do not erase the hardships, but they make them bearable. As the evening deepens, the city begins to dream. Eleanor whispers a final prayer as she lays her youngest child to bed. Her husband stirs the embers in the hearth, ensuring the fire will last through the night. Walter sits by the window of his small home, watching the moonlight ripple on the surface of the Thames, and Giles hums a lullaby to himself as he stretches out on his straw mattress. His lute resting beside him. Faith, community, and small joys, these are the unseen pillars that hold up the city of London. They are what allow its people to endure the unendurable, to find hope in the midst of struggle, and to believe that tomorrow, though uncertain, is worth facing. Let your body relax now, your shoulders soft, your breath slow and steady, as we move gently through time. Though the life of a medieval Londoner was difficult, marked by toil, taxes, and tight coin, there were days when the city transformed, when gloom lifted and gave way to light, laughter, and the scent of roasted meats on the breeze. These were the feast days, the holy festivals, the London fairs. Moments when the entire city, even the poorest alleys, could feel touched by joy. There were more than 50 feast days a year, spread like stars across the calendar, from Michaelmas to Candlemas, from All Saints' Day to Corpus Christi. On these days, work often stopped. Markets swelled with color and sound. Church bells rang longer, and the air smelled of spices, ale, and pies. Eleanor, the baker's wife, would wake early, not to bake loaves for market, but to prepare something special for her family. On feast days, she might afford honey or even dried fruit. She would bake fruitenty, a porridge of cracked wheat and milk, flavored with cinnamon, if she had any to spare. Her children would squeal at the sight of it, for it was a luxury they saw only on the holiest days. And for a moment, their faces would glow as though kissed by sunlight. In the city square, young men would set up maypoles, weaving ribbons in rhythmic dances. Elders would watch from benches, nibbling on oatcakes, clapping along to the beat of pipes and tambourines. Walter, the fishmonger, though not a festive man by nature, would allow himself a rest. He would set aside a salted eel, boil it with herbs, and drink a cup of ale from a tavern clay jug. His wife would join him on the stoop, and they would just sit, watching the bustle, not as workers, but as Londoners, sharing in a rare peace. These festivals also brought fairs, the grandest of which was Bartholomew Fair, in Smithfield. Held in late August, it drew merchants, performers, jugglers, puppeteers, and traders from all across England. Children pressed their faces against the stalls of glass beads and painted dolls. Men tried roasted goose on skewers, while women examined bolts of dyed cloth, considering what a new shawl might cost. Giles, the minstrel, loved the fairs. There, he was not merely background noise. He was part of the attraction. He would stand on a makeshift stage in front of the cloth merchant's stall, playing his lute and telling stories of dragons and princesses, of the Crusades, of Robin Hood, of saints who healed with a touch. His cup would fill more on these days than in a whole week of taverns, and more than the coin. He cherished the way children stared at him in wonder, the way elders nodded as if to say, "Yes, we remember." Faith was not left behind during these celebrations. Churches hosted processions, lines of people in robes, candles flickering in daylight, chanting in unison. Saints' relics were paraded through the streets, believed to bring protection and ward off sickness. It was believed that even watching such a procession could bring a soul closer to salvation at night. After the feasting, after the singing, after the dancing had slowed, the city would settle again. But on feast nights, there was something different in the silence, a kind of glowing stillness, a softness in the dark, as if the city itself had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. These were the days people remembered when winter was coldest, when the taxman knocked, when the roof leaked and no one had coin for mending. It was these festivals, with their colors, their warmth, their community, that reminded people they were not just workers. They were part of something greater, something beautiful, even if fleeting. And so, in a city filled with hardship, Londoners found brightness, not in the abundance of wealth, but in the richness of shared moments. A cup passed between friends, a song sung beneath the stars, a prayer whispered over roast meat, asterisk, a ribbon tied to a mop. Each one, a thread in the fabric of life. Each one, a reason to carry on. Asterisk, let your thoughts drift now, into the quiet corners of the city, the places where little feet scamper through puddles, where laughter echoes softly down crooked alleys, and where childhood, though brief and often burdened, still finds moments of magic. In medieval London, childhood was not a long, lazy dream. It was a fleeting window, a short passage between cradle and craft. Most children worked. Nearly all had responsibilities from the moment their hands could hold, grasp, carry, or stir. But even in labor, they played. Even in hardship, they learned to smile. Let us begin with Alice, Eleanor's eldest daughter. She is 9 years old, and already she knows how to knead dough, stack firewood, and sweep flour dust from the bakery floor without raising too much. She rises before the sun, yawning as she fastens her apron, and moves with the rhythm of routine. She hums softly, an echo of her mother's lullabies, as she sets bowls upon the table and feeds scraps of crust to the chicken outside their door. There are no school bells for Alice, no slates, no lessons. Her learning comes from her mother's hands, from the weight of dough, and from the soft, precise words of morning instructions. Not too much water, love. A dough that's too wet will not rise. Many children in London became apprentices, some as young as 7, though most began around age 12. An apprenticeship was a formal agreement. A child would live with a master tradesperson for several years, learning a craft in exchange for food, shelter, and training. It was a contract not just of skill, but of obedience. In a small home off East, a boy named Thomas begins his apprenticeship under a candlemaker. He wakes to the smell of tallow animal fat, melted and thick. His hands are already speckled with wax burns. Each day, he dips wicks into warm fat, pulls them gently, and hangs them to dry. Over and over, dipping, drying, shaping light from labor. His master is fair, but strict. A single mistake, a crooked wick, a spoiled batch means missing supper. Still, Thomas learns, and slowly, he begins to take pride in the precision of his work. Becoming an apprentice was often the only way for a child to escape poverty, to one day earn a place in a guild, and to, perhaps, open a shop of their own. But it was not easy. Apprentices could not marry. They were expected to be loyal, silent, hard-working. They lived under the master's roof and followed his rules. For boys, this often meant 7 years of servitude. For girls, even longer, especially if they worked in weaving, spinning, or baking. Still, some found joy. There were apprentice holidays once or twice a year, when rules were relaxed and children were allowed to parade through the city, singing songs, playing instruments, even wearing paper crowns. For one day, they were not servants, they were kings, even if only in jest. Giles, the minstrel, often told stories to apprentices when they gathered at taverns after sunset. He would sit in the corner, his lute across his lap, and strum gently as he spoke of famous tradesmen who rose from humble beginnings to become leaders of guilds, even sheriffs of London. And so it was, he would say with a wink, that a lad who once swept ashes became the master of masons, with gold in his pocket, and his name carved above every doorway. The apprentices would smile, sip their watered ale, and for a moment, believe it was possible, in families too poor to secure an apprenticeship. Children often worked odd jobs, fetching water, carrying baskets, cleaning stables. These children, called servants, lived with families richer than their own, sometimes working for nothing more than meals and a place to sleep. But even then, many of them dreamed, not of wealth, but of safety, of full bellies, of shoes without holes. And what of joy? Did children in medieval London ever play? Yes. Even in the tightest lanes, you could find children laughing, chasing one another with sticks, spinning wooden tops, playing at being knights and queens. They carved little dolls from scraps of wood. They fashioned slings from old cloth. They played bucklers and shields, mocked sword fights with bits of firewood. And in winter, when snow fell rare and thick, they tossed snowballs and skated on frozen patches of the Thames, screaming with delight. At night, these children fell asleep, not to lullabies, but to stories. Their parents whispered tales of saints and sinners, of dragons slain and fortunes won. And in their dreams, perhaps they wandered through green fields, or sailed across stormy seas, or built great towers of stone with their own calloused hands. Let your body soften, as if you were sinking into a warm pile of straw, a linen blanket pulled over your shoulders, the hush of night wrapping around you like wool. The streets outside are dark now. Lanterns flicker, doors are bolted, and families huddle in quiet spaces, inside their homes, their corners of the city, their moments of peace. Home life in medieval London was simple, sometimes harsh, but not without its comforts. Though houses were small and resources limited, people made their dwellings warm with care, and their routines rich with rhythm. Let us step inside Eleanor's home. It is a narrow house of timber and plaster, tucked between the bakery and a tailor's shop. 3 rooms total, one for sleeping, one for cooking, and one for working dough and preparing the daily bread. The floors are uneven wood. A few rushes are scattered beneath the table, scented with herbs like lavender or rosemary to mask the smells of city life. Smoke curls gently from the hearth. A stew simmers in a blackened pot, thick with onions, leeks, and barley, simple, hearty, and shared by all. The fire is not just for warmth, it is the heart of the home. It cooks, it lights, and it soothes at the end of every hard day. Medieval homes were rarely private. Parents, children, and sometimes servants all shared the same sleeping space. In Eleanor's home, the bed is a low, wooden frame with a straw-filled mattress. The children sleep on pallets nearby, wrapped in wool cloaks or patched quilts. In colder months, they huddle close, body heat, the best insulation they know. There is no glass in the windows, just shutters, closed tightly against the wind. And yet, there is comfort. There is safety in the creak of the walls, in the rhythm of breathing beside you, in knowing that despite everything, you are not alone. In wealthier homes, like those of merchants or guild leaders, rooms were more plentiful, and comforts more refined. They had feather beds, iron candle holders, and perhaps even painted walls with simple patterns of vines or saints. But for most Londoners, a home was humble: a hearth, a bench, a wash basin, and the smell of bread or broth always somewhere in the air. Bathing, though less frequent than today, was not forgotten. Many homes had wooden tubs, used sparingly due to the cost of heating water. A whole family might share one bath, starting with the father and ending with the smallest child. There was a saying, "Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater," and it came from this very ritual. When the water was so murky by the end, one had to be careful not to toss out more than just the liquid. Cleanliness was linked to both health and godliness. People washed their hands before meals, and often wiped their faces with damp cloths. Soap was rare, but ashes mixed with fat made a serviceable scrub. Lavender or mint was sometimes tucked into tunics to keep odors away, a practice both practical and pleasant. Mealtimes were central to family life. A typical dinner might include black bread made from coarse rye flour, a stew of root, vegetables, ale, watered for children, perhaps a boiled egg, or a slice of cheese. Salted meat or fish was a luxury. Fresh fruit was for summer only, and sweets, those were for feast days. The food was simple, but nourishing, and it was often eaten from a shared dish with wooden spoons or fingers. There were no forks in most homes. The fork was still seen as foreign, strange, and even prideful. Most ate with knives and bread as scoops. And yet, despite what was lacking, no spice racks, no silverware, no sugar, people found joy in a warm bowl, a piece of fresh bread, and the quiet sound of a fire popping nearby. Children love one ritual most: the evening story after supper. They gather near the hearth, and she tells them tales of saints who tamed dragons, of kings who ruled fairly, of animals who spoke in dreams. These stories were more than entertainment. They passed on lessons, morals, and beliefs. They were the songs of memory, whispered down the line, generation to generation. Evenings also brought prayer, a simple gesture, a sign of the cross, a murmur of thanks, and then sleep. And then sleep, not always restful, for there were no thick mattresses, no silence from the streets, no locks that guaranteed safety. But it was sleep nonetheless, earned, needed, wrapped in straw and soot and stories. Home in medieval London was not made of wealth. It was made of closeness, of endurance, of the little ways people cared for each other: a spoonful of stew, a repaired cloak, a lullaby sung in the dark. Take another breath as the hush of night folds over the rooftops, and the flickering lanterns give way to shadows. Let the world become still, because even in the middle of a bustling city, there were quiet fears that lived beneath every floorboard, behind every prayer, in every mother's worried eyes. In medieval London, death was never far, and life, for all its effort, was never guaranteed. Let us begin with the silence of grief, not the loud wailing of the funeral bells, but the hush that follows after, when the bread must still be baked, when the stall must still be opened, when children must still be fed, even though one bowl sits empty now. Grief was not hidden, but it was worked through, stitched into the routines, tucked between the prayers, swept into corners and burned into candlelight. Eleanor has known loss. 2 winters ago, her youngest son took ill, a cough that grew too deep, fevered cheeks that cooled too quickly. The local physic came, offered herbs and leeches, but nothing helped. They buried him in the yard behind St. Dunstan's, in a grave marked only by a wooden cross. Eleanor visits sometimes, though not every day. The ache is always there, but life demands her hands, and so she kneads and sings softly as she works, and kisses her remaining children twice each night, once for love, once for fear. Death came in many forms: illness, accident, childbirth, fever, and famine. Londoners, knowing how thin the line was, clung to superstition as a way to feel safer. Some wore small charms, a carved bone, a feather tied in thread, a saint's medal pressed to the chest. Others whispered protection prayers, or avoided certain corners of streets where curses were rumored to dwell. It was believed that illness could be caused by bad air, called miasma. A foul smell was thought to invite disease. So, people burned rosemary or carried oranges pierced with cloves. Some wore sachets of herbs around their necks to ward off the unseen. And when illness struck, it was not just a doctor they called. It was the priest, the herbalist, the midwife, the neighbor with stories of strange cures that worked once, long ago. Walter, the fishmonger, remembers when a fire broke out in a home just down the alley. It spread fast, wooden walls, dry rushes, flames that reached with hungry fingers. The city had no fire brigade, no sirens, only buckets passed hand to hand, and prayers shouted into the smoke. A child died in that fire, and for weeks after, Walter's wife left small offerings at the edge of the market, a piece of bread, a pinch of salt, a whispered blessing for all children to sleep safe. Children were especially fragile. 1 in 3 did not survive past infancy, and so, mothers often gave their babies nicknames that disguised them from jealous spirits. Names like Hob, Knob, or No Name, meant to confuse fate and protect their little ones from being noticed by death. Still, amid all this fear, there was a deep reverence for ritual. Death was not the end, but a crossing. The dying were anointed with holy oil. Candles were placed in their hands. Loved ones prayed aloud, even as their voices shook. The funeral procession moved slowly through the streets, with mourners in black, and tolling bells that rang once for every year the soul had lived. The community came together. Grief was shared. Food was offered. Stories were told. Giles the minstrel once sang at the funeral of a guildmaster. He did not sing of loss, but of reunion, a tale of a sailor lost at sea, found again in a golden hall beyond the stars. As he sang, those gathered wept softly, not just for the man buried, but for the memories he left behind. Londoners believed deeply in heaven, but they also feared purgatory, a place of waiting, where souls endured trial before finding peace. That is why they paid priests to say masses for the dead, why they lit candles, why they left coins at the altar that to help their loved ones find the light faster. There were darker beliefs too, of witches, omens, and ghosts. It was said that if you heard 3 knocks at your door in the night, but no one stood there, a spirit who was trying to pass on a message. Cats were both revered and feared. Black cats especially, thought to be companions to witches. And the number 13 was avoided wherever possible. Many would not sit 13 at a table, for fear that one would soon be lost. But for all these fears, people still found ways to live with grace and courage. They planted herbs in windowsills. They told stories of saints who healed. They shared wine and prayer when someone fell ill, and each sunrise, they stepped back into the city's rhythm, choosing hope. Despite the uncertainty woven into every cobblestone dot in London, death was not just an end, it was a teacher, a shadow that made every warm fire feel brighter, every embrace tighter, every loaf of bread more precious. And so they lived, not without fear, but with deep reverence for each moment that passed without sorrow. Asterisk, close your eyes now, and imagine a street in twilight, not gloomy, but humming gently with the sounds of distant laughter, the clink of mugs, and the soft strumming of stringed music echoing from behind thick wooden doors. Though life in medieval London was hard, people still laughed. They had to, for in a world of toil and trouble, laughter was a kind of rebellion, a spark in the dust. Let us begin with the tavern, the heart of London's working-class cheer. Taverns were not just for ale. They were where news traveled, where songs were sung, and where, for the price of a penny, you could hear a bawdy tale that made even a laborer's backache feel lighter. Wooden benches creaked with bodies, candles flickered in iron sconces, and Giles, the minstrel, tuned his lute in the corner, ready to play. There were different types of humor in those days, some clever, some crude, and some so old they lived in rhyme. One favorite joke format, mocking daily life. Here's an example, told in inns across the city. A tailor walked into the church and prayed for a better meal. God answered, "Work harder and stitch with less steel." Puns and jabs about lazy nobles, gossiping neighbors, or greedy millers were common in conversation and song. Children had their own games. In back alleys and quiet yards, they played Hoodman Blind, a game like blind man's bluff, laughing as they bumped into barrels and chased phantom voices. They told riddles too, rhyming puzzles that tested memory and wit. Here's one they might share. I fly without wings. I cry without eyes. Whenever I go, darkness flies. What am I? Answer, the wind. Eleanor's children loved riddles, and on slow baking days, she would let them gather round the hearth while she recited one or two. Laughter, she believed, made the bread rise faster. In public squares, there were traveling jesters and mummers. Their performances were loud, often foolish, and intentionally ridiculous. They wore bells on their hats, painted faces, and spoke in silly rhymes. A favorite trick, pretending to be priests or nobility, a sly dig at those in power. The crowd loved it. Laughter had no social class. It belonged to everyone. Festivals brought more than food and dancing. They brought mischief on Feast of Fools. Rules were reversed. Apprentices mocked masters. Women teased men. And even the local clergy played along. People dressed as animals, painted their noses red, and paraded through the streets chanting mock hymns that made even the sternest face crack a smile. For one day, no one was too important to be laughed at, not even the mayor. Even in homes, after long days of toil, families found joy in simple entertainment. Walter, the fishmonger, was known for imitating customers after dinner, puckering his lips, squinting his eyes, and mimicking their voices in high pitch. His wife would shake her head, but her eyes sparkled, and the children would collapse in giggles. Londoners even laughed at fear. There were tales of ghosts so clumsy they tripped over chamber pots, of demons who could not spell Latin, of witches who accidentally cursed themselves. Jokes, even about death, helped people feel braver, helped them feel that the dark could be softened by a good laugh. Music was another joy. Giles's favorite tune was not a solemn ballad, but a cheeky ditty about a monk who stole pies from the abbey kitchen. Brother Hugh, what did you do? You left the stew and took the brew. You blamed the cook, but stole the book that had the recipe too. The tavern roared when he played that. Even the barkeep cracked a smile. There was also beauty in poetry, in street songs sung while hanging laundry, or love notes scratched on a wooden beam in a market stall. People might not read or write fluently, but they could remember lyrics, could repeat rhymes that stitched joy through generations. And on warm nights, when the moon rose quietly, neighbors would sit outside their homes, talking softly, telling funny stories of weddings gone wrong, of sheep that escaped during sermons, of pigs that learned how to knock on doors for scraps. Laughter drifted up to the stars, gentle, like lullabies for the city. For in medieval London, joy was not grand. It was found in moments, a clever rhyme, a crooked smile, a child's game, a song that made the whole tavern sway. Laughter was not just escape, it was resistance. A way of saying, we are still here, and still human. And now, as your body rests deeply, as the hush of night surrounds you like a soft woolen blanket, we reach the quietest part of our journey. Let your breath rise and fall like the slow tide of the Thames, and drift with me into the gentle spaces between memory and time, where the past lingers not as noise, but as a whisper. The bakers, the fishmongers, the candlemakers, and the minstrels, they are all gone now, their footsteps worn away by centuries of rain and stone, their names erased from ledgers, their faces forgotten by history books, but their presence remains. All around, walk the streets of London today, and you will find echoes. Cheapside still bustles with buyers. Smithfield still hums with trade. The bells of St. Paul's still toll. New stone, perhaps, but an old sound. stretching back through centuries of sleep and waking. Eleanor's bakery no longer stands, but the tradition of daily bread lives on. Every loaf pulled, fresh from an oven, every crust broken at table, is part of the thread she helped spin. Her hands rough from dough, steady from labor, are echoed now in every corner bakery where early risers shape warmth from flour and fire. Walter the fishmonger would not recognize the gleaming seafood stalls by the modern Thames, but he would smile at the careful arrangement of cod and eel, at the merchant wiping scales from his fingers with the same tired gesture Walter once used himself. Giles the minstrel, well, his music might be drowned by the roar of buses and trains, but in a quiet tunnel where a lone guitarist strums for passersby, or in the sweet hum of a busker under the arches of Southbank, Giles is there. In the spirit of every street song, every story told to strangers for a coin and a smile. The people of medieval London were not kings, not saints, not heroes carved in marble. They were ordinary, and yet they are the reason London still lives. They laid the cobblestones, they raised the timber, they shaped customs, passed down recipes, taught songs that still live in lullabies. They built community with their kindness, their effort, their belief that even in hard times, there is something worth preserving. Their crafts became trades, their guilds became institutions, their apprenticeships shaped centuries of learning. The idea that a boy or girl could train in a skill, earn a living, and build a future that was born in their hands. The layout of the streets, the heart of the markets, the old churches that still stand, those are fingerprints left by thousands of quiet lives, and every stone, every beam holds the weight of the lives they lived. They taught us how to gather, how to endure, how to love fiercely even when tomorrow was uncertain. New joy in simple things, a warm fire, a full belly, a shared laugh, and that wisdom remains, even in their beliefs. They offered us something timeless, the idea that there is meaning in ordinary work, that there is holiness in daily bread, and that even the smallest life leaves a mark on the world. So tonight, as you rest, know that you are held in a long, quiet lineage, not of kings or conquerors, but of workers, lovers, parents, dreamers, people who, like you, closed their eyes each night and hoped for a better morning. People who found comfort in the sound of children sleeping, the smell of bread, and the whisper of wind against a wooden shutter. You carry their spirit. You honor their struggle by remembering, by living gently, and by seeing beauty where it is easily missed. And now, let the city fade. Let the soft clatter of carts grow quiet. Let the lanterns dim, one by one. Let the cobblestones cool. Let the market stalls rest. Let the voices of the past sink into a silence as deep and comforting as sleep itself. You are safe, you are warm, and you are not alone. The past is holding you. The quiet lives of history watch over you. And somewhere, beneath the oldest stones of London, the city sighs and dreams with you. Good night, sleep well.